Today, I am joined by Magnus Grimeland, the founder and CEO of Antler. Magnus has an impressive background from serving in the Norwegian Special Forces to working at McKinsey and to co-founding Zalora, one of Southeast Asia's biggest e-commerce companies. With Antler, he set out to build a new kind of VC, investing at the inception stage. Antler now operates in around 30 locations across 6 continents, has backed more than 1,800 startups worldwide, and has made close to 300 investments in the Nordics alone since 2019. It is consistently ranked as one of the most active early-stage investors globally. Welcome, Magnus.
Thank you. Thanks, Espen. Great to see you.
Likewise, and I do quite a lot of these intros, and your background is so impressive that it's probably the longest intro I had to make. So I had to go through it a few times when saying it. But happy to join.
Very lucky to be part of some interesting things.
You're an impressive guy. Can you just take us back to the very first days of Antler? What was the moment that you decided to do it, and what were like when you realize you want to do this? What are the first things you actually do to make it real?
The process was such. I was building a startup called Zalora.com, which ended up being very successful. And when we exited it, it was the second biggest, I think, exit at the time in the region in Southeast Asia. Which is a region of about 700 million people, growing very fast. And then I stayed for a couple more years as a chief operating officer of Global Fashion Group, which later IPO'd. And we operated across 32 countries globally. So I got exposed to a lot of really amazing founder talent. And we saw a lot of those people go on to build great companies. Shopee in Southeast Asia, which is part of C Group, which is, I think, close to $100 billion business now. Gojek, biggest IPO out of Indonesia, $23 billion. Tab Baby used to work with in Global Fashion Group. The founder, Hossam Arab, is probably the fast growing company in the Middle East, and lots of others. So I got very excited about kind of backing those types of people who could take very hard problems, solve them, and build great companies around them. And for about it was like 5 months period, I was iterating that idea together with a couple other things I'm excited about. I'm excited about the preventive healthcare space. I'm excited about the energy transition space and a few others. And then, I just booked a small office. If you could host like 3 people, but I think we were 8 people in there. I just invited all the smart people I know, or I knew he was around, and said, "Hey, come work with me. We're iterating business ideas." And at some point of time, I could only think about this, right? I woke up every morning thinking about, okay, how can we be a great partner to founders who are just getting started? So I got, logically convinced this was the right thing to do, and then the heart followed. And then I'd set myself a deadline that by the end of 2017, we should make a decision. And I think it was the 30th of December 2017. So I was like 4 months in, we're going to go for this. And we then created a bit of a straw man, sent it to the developer and on one of those outsourced platforms, and created our first website, which went live, I think, 2nd of January 2018. And then just started looking for great founders across Asia that were excited about building a new company. And we could be a supporter and a strong investor in the first round. So that's how it started. So it was quite kind of iterative process, but something I thought about for a long time. As innovation is becoming more decentralized. People are building great companies all over the world.
Yeah, it's very impressive how far you've gotten. I was just saying before we started the recording, then you meet a lot of people, so maybe you don't remember, but I met you like in the early days when you were raising a fund, and it was because is it to correctly remember that you started out in Singapore? Was that where the first office was? And then Norway came later. Then you're Norwegian.
Stockholm was number 2, actually, yes. But obviously serving the Nordic market.
Yeah. Was there any like crazy, probably a lot, or unlikely stories from the very early days of Antler where things almost did not work out, or you had to improvise or change?
I think, as I think most founders, you're a little bit delusional, right? So you always think that things will work out. Even like I remember in the Zalora days, there were so many times we were really, really struggling, and obviously in Antler as well in the early days, it was quite tough. because there's a lot of people who've done kind of variations of what we're doing that hasn't worked out that all that way, and also obviously a lot of really amazing established VCs. So you need to really come in there with something that has a very strong value proposition towards the best founders. And I remember, us raising that first fund. I think it took us 9 months or so to close the first 5 million, which was mostly kind of friends, family, connections, my own money, and so on, right? From the past sale. And, that took a lot of work. And if you think about it, raising, we were probably like 100 million under management in 2020, end of 2020, which is, if you look at it now, that's the same amount. So it took us kind of 2.5, 3 years to get there. And now we do the same in 2 to 3 months, right? So I think as with any business, getting the flywheel to really kick off in the early days, meaning you have access to great for us, the flywheel is easy, right? It's if we can back great founders, then they will build great companies. Those companies will get great investors on board in subsequent rounds, and we aim to be part of them as well. That will lead to strong returns. Strong returns lead to us having access to more capital, meaning we can build an even better platform. That means we're an even better partner to the founders. But getting that off the ground in any company, I think is sometimes tough. Like with Zalora, it was a bit of a marketplace, right? You need to create supply and demand at the same time. For a VC, I think it's you need to not only be able to access really great founders, but at the same time have the capital to back them, right? And that once that works, it's incredibly exciting, because the more great founders you back, typically the more great founders want to work with you, and the better returns you have, and that means you have access to more capital, right? And I think we've been quite fortunate to continue to just be better and better and focus on that one thing, and that has served us well through an interesting macro environment, right? When we started, obviously, we were going into was possibly kind of the fastest growing part of tech before now. And then you had 22, 23, 24, which was a little bit slower. And then now it's picking up again. It's been definitely interesting challenges, but we never doubted our ability to succeed. And I say that I do this founder talks with most of our founders, right? And one of the things I always talk about is like, you need to go into building something new with the mindset that failure is not an option, right? Like if that even creeps into your mind, the chances of you failing is going to be much, much higher. I think the founders that end up really succeeding, yes, they've been close to death many times on the way, but they never lost the belief that they would succeed.
Yeah. So I assume you never lost the belief in the first 9 months either.
No.
Were there any? What would the this is just interesting, like going from, I can say, 0 to 1 in setting this up, and you say like the first 9 months were more challenging. What were the typical concerns? Is that you hadn't done it before, or that this was a new model, or that there were many other, like what were the typical challenges you would meet in raising the first money?
Well, I think, it's these transitions are always a little tough, right? So I've done these transitions a few times, and I think a lot of founders have done that because they did something before. Obviously, there are some founders who just been building companies since high school, right? And they've never done anything else. But most founders will do something else first, and then they start building a company. And I was working in McKinsey, and then left to set up Zalora. And then McKinsey is an incredible place. Like, I loved it there, working with insanely great people, deeply intellectual, great networks. You're working on really interesting problems. But your role is really to give incredible advice to great leaders, right? And you are not responsible for acting on it or deciding on it. When you're a startup founder, you need to make hundreds of decisions every day. And if you don't make them, you become a bottleneck, and you can't sit there and think 2 to 3 months about something to get the right solution. You need to act and move quickly and create momentum. And that was a challenging transition for me. I remember as we were building Zalora. And then when we made the transition from building Zalora to Antler, the difference here is that when you're building a company, you're really raising money for a problem you're solving and the business you're building around it, right? When you're raising money for venture capital, you are kind of managing other people's money with the with obviously their belief that you will return more capital to them over the next few years, right? And then they obviously LPs are very sophisticated and they have multiple opportunities to deploy that capital, right? They can deploy it into private equity or hedge funds or bonds or real estate or other VCs, right? So you need to really go in there with a tremendous amount of responsibility and convince them that you will be a good custodians of their capital, and that will deliver strong returns. And that's obviously a skill set that as you move as a founder to, obviously I'm also a founder in Antler, but as you move from building a company to being an investor, it's a different type of mindset, right? So I've been through a few of these transitions. And I think, if there's kind of founders listening to this out there who are just in the process of building their company who is doing this transition, I think talking to other people who've been through similar type transition is very, very helpful. Like I spent a lot of time talking to all the best VCs in the world, all asset managers. I brought on board people in the board who had responsibility of managing a lot of money. Like, for example, our co-chair, Sheila Patel, she's around Goldman Sachs Asset Management, who's a $3 trillion asset manager. James Anderson is probably the best tech investor out of the UK the last decade. He's an investor in SpaceX and Tesla. And Nancy Zimmerman is probably the most successful female fund manager out of the US. And so I brought people in who have that experience, and I spent a lot of time talking to the people who've done this really well, because you don't, sure, we were kind of reinventing a little bit how you invest, and we have a specific approach to investing, but we don't need to reinvent everything related to being a good custodian for people's money and being a good asset manager, right? So, you can learn a lot, even if there are differences in your business model and the problem you're trying to solve.
But you mentioned these fantastic people you brought on. How, very practical question, but how do you get access to them? And is that also related to your previous success? Because I mean, they must be very sought after, these people. So how do you actually go out and connect with them?
And to answer that question, so one is, I think that there's, for most people, I'm not saying everyone, somebody just, goes out there and they're successful immediately. But for most people, there's a part of life which is kind of preparatory that allows you to do more things in the future. I always thought that a goal in life should be to get closer and closer to what you're very passionate about. And you won't always be there, but it should be a step on the way to getting there, right? But I kind of got closer and closer, right? Like when I built Zalora, it was very exciting. We hired 3,000 people and we built a really great business, but we were ultimately selling fashion, right? I didn't want to spend the rest of my life getting people better clothes. So with Antler, I kind of arrived at, now I have the ability to kind of do what I'm very excited about and do that for the rest of my life. And then I could utilize all the networks and skill set that I built on the way. So that's kind of one part of it. And then the second part, I think, is once you meet incredible people, you might meet them at a barbecue, or you might meet them at your sister's wedding, or you might meet them at the bus, or you can meet them anywhere. They might be your professor. Try to, I think, take advantage of those relationships, like stay in contact with people. And then it's much easier to go and ask someone to be part of what you're doing, right? So I think those two things enable that.
Yeah, Magnus, you've seen a lot, and you've done a lot, and you work with some very, very smart people. But there must surely also have been some misses or some moments where you got it wrong. It could have been like advice you give to others, or beliefs you had about investing. Are there any of you that you can share, and how that have changed sort of your view on things?
if I look back at my biggest misses, it's typically been when I didn't take an opportunity, right? It's seldom been when I did go all in at doing something, right? So like, for example, when I was a freshman student at Harvard, Facebook was started, and Mark Zuckerberg was hiring interns for equity, and at the time I had the 1-year-old kid and wasn't quite in a position to go on an unpaid internship, right? They had to change nappies and so on, right? But obviously those interns are probably worth like 100 million each in Facebook's stocks, like when they IPO'd, right? So there are things like that. It's the same with Antler. Like, when we invest into a company, we invest into them because we really believe in the founders, we believe in what they're building, we believe in the idea. And then sometimes we're wrong, and then we obviously lose that money. But that doesn't really keep us awake that much, because as long as we made a decision in a really well-reasoned way and we really believed in those people, what is more challenging is the ones you said no to that ended up doing incredibly well, right? And they are really expensive, right? Like, there was a company, I won't mention the name or out of confidentiality reasons, but it was a company in Europe we could invest into at like a very good valuation back in, it was 2019, and it got screened out by someone on our team, and then 5 years, or it was like 2 years later, the company was worth $5 billion, right? So that's a $500 million mistake.
Yeah, because I was about to ask, have you reflected on some of those cases, let's say investments where you have you missed a good opportunity? Are there any sort of common denominators? Is it something about a market changing, or is it something about risk profile? Or I know it must be difficult because there are many variables at play here, but is there anything that you spot like, oh, this is actually one thing we have to be very careful about?
Oh, tons. So, for example, in the early days, we on purpose did not back single founders, and statistically, that's the right thing to do, because if you look at statistics for the last 20 years and you look at all the unicorns that have been built, I think there's only about 1.2% of them or so that was built by a single founder. So there's solid logic behind that. Now, we come in so early typically, and many of the companies we invest into, we now invest from pre-seed to Series C, so we also come in later, but typically we come in very early, and at that point of time, there's been a number of like really great people who've been in front of us that we didn't back because they didn't have a co-founder. And then literally like 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 months later, they found like an exceptional co-founder and they built an amazing business, and we lost out on that first opportunity, right? So, we remove that as a criteria. Obviously, the bar is higher, and sometimes we'll kind of work with them on finding that co-founder, or just kind of nurture them for a while before we invest. But sometimes we'll invest in them even before they found that co-founder, because we lost out on a lot of great opportunities that way. There are another thing is we just looked at our kind of data for the early years a few years back, and there seemed to be a bit of a over-index for experience, right? So one of the things we look for in people is a spike, we look for drive, we look for grit, and some of those things are easier to show when you've been around a bit longer, right? Like, if you worked for 10 years, it's easier to show a spike. It's easier to show that you have a ton of drive. It's easier to show that you have grit, because you experience a lot of stuff on the way that enables you to talk about that. Now, if you're just coming out of college, or in college you're a dropout, it's harder to show that, right? You need to look for different signals. So we missed out on some great opportunities because we didn't pick up on those signals in the early days, but now we're getting really good at that, right? So like, if you won a Rubik's Cube competition, or you're like, we just backed this incredible team out of Germany called PKI. One of the founders was one of the top people in the world in computer gaming. All right, we become much better at looking at these signals that are not related to how long people have worked or how much experience they have, but just what's their ability to achieve greatness in a way, right? And that could be something completely different than having worked in an exceptional place. And we rooted out. So I think that we think now, at least, we rooted out all of those learning. Like, so you learn, and then you adjust your investment processes and your funnel and all that. But we have the partners on the call all from all across the globe. We're in 30 locations now across 6 continents, right? And every 3 weeks we get everyone together and we discover new things. Every 9 months we bring everyone together in person, and then we discover even more things for 2 to 3 days, right? So there's this continuous learning process.
I guess the venture capital landscape is also changed, or has changed, and is changing a lot. So there's less capital out there. I guess that depends on who you are, but in general, because of high interest rates and all this, and AI has been making it easier to launch new products and new companies. There are, at least, well, I focus mostly on Scandinavia, more angels. So if we just look at like how versus, would you say, Antler now and where you're going versus the Antler you sort of set up in the beginning, are there any things that are changing? And maybe sort of to probe the question a bit more, you've had more, and correct me if I'm wrong, Magnus, more sort of general focus. There are like many opportunities, but we're seeing more niche and more narrow focused funds out there. Do you think that's something Antler is going to sort of, are you going to be more narrowed in on certain verticals, or do you think you want to stay more sort of broad?
One thing will never change, and that is we fundamentally believe we should be really great at one thing and one thing only, and that is finding and investing into founders that are building the future, and not predict the future, right? So we don't try to predict the future, but we try to find the people who are building the future. So we will not enter into deep research on how will this specific area move and try to predict where it will be in the future. We want to really kind of find the people who are building it, and that means that what has ended up happening is we tend to be quite early on big technological shifts because they are being built by the people that we back, right? So, for example, with AI, we made a ton of AI investments in 2019, 2020, 2021, way before kind of ChatGPT. And that's continued to grow because opportunities become bigger and bigger, not because we predicted that to happen, but we were backing founders who were just deeper in that area than anyone else was, and they built that future.
Let's ask about that, Michael. So how did that, they came in or applied to Antler, and you thought these people are fantastic and they're passionate about this new thing, and they're passionate about AI before AI became such a hot topic. But like, how did you end up investing in these people?
Yeah, exactly, right? So let me take an example, like Salient out of Australia. Like, we had this incredible founder who'd been working on an AI on the edge algorithm for 15 years. And he just didn't really know how to turn that into a business. And we connected him with another founder who had just sold his last company, an MIT engineer, just sold his last company for $40 million and wanted to build a new company. And then together they commercialized that technology, right? And it's an incredible AI business, which has AI on the edge, which removes noise and sensors all across the globe and makes the machine learning algorithms better, serving Palantir, Sony, and a bunch of other great people. And that was back in 2019, and there's like a ton of these examples. Like, I wouldn't be able to sit down there and say, hey, AI on the edge is going to be the next big thing. We believed in them, and we believed in the problem they were solving. But fundamentally, we believed in them. So that part will never change. Now, some things do change, right? So, for example, in the early days, partially because we didn't have enough access to capital, and partially also because we believed that we weren't kind of quite ready for it yet, is we more or less only back people through the residency program. So meaning people will come and join us for 2-3 months, and then we kind of work with them, and then we back the best people. We still do that to a big extent, right? Like, I think this year we'll get 160,000 founder applicants for that, and we'll back probably 400 or so new companies who are building companies from scratch together with us. But we also realized that for some founders, that's not the right path, and we just back them in the first round if we have very high conviction. And sometimes we also realize, hey, we missed out on the pre-seed round. Let's back them in seed or Series A or Series B or Series C if we could, as early as we can get into the best companies, right? So there's an evolution of how we ensure that we continuously are more and more relevant to all the best founders out there, and that we can continue to deliver very strong returns back to our LPs. But the fundamental thesis that, hey, Antler's mission is to back the best founders in the world who are building the future as quickly as possible, and then focusing in all of our resources to being as relevant as possible to them, meaning, building out our perks platform, helping them with the talent acquisition, helping them with raising the next round. We developed 3,000 VC relationships now, helping them scale globally through our global infrastructure, helping them with operator and advisor networks. That part remains true and will, I think, remain true forever. But the way you apply it and the way you get into these founders will kind of evolve, and you will be smarter on your decision making and all that stuff, right? But to get back to your original question, that's what we are doing, right? And we want to be our value add. I still think there's tremendous space for people who are highly vertically specialized. Like, we have lots of great funds like this that are backing our portfolio. I think within some areas, this is very, very valuable. It adds a lot of value to the founders. They can deliver really great funds. So that works really well as well. So, I think if for people who are in VC or people who are thinking about setting up a fund, I think one should kind of choose a thesis that you believe really works and where you can add a lot of value, and then focus on being really, really great at that, right? And that's what we're trying to apply that to Antler.
Yeah, it makes sense, obviously. And talking about change again, so one of the sort of things you have to be really good at is spotting these exceptional founders, right? Do you think that what it takes to be an exceptional founder, I assume there will always be some characteristics that are the same, but are there any skill sets that have the skill set that you look for changed as it becomes cheaper and faster to build new software products, for instance?
I think that obviously now you can build great companies with smaller teams. You can scale things much faster than you ever done. You can build things cheaper than you did in the past, right? When we built Zalora, we had to build server parks, a logistics network, we had to build a payment system, we had to build all this infrastructure, which was completely unrelated to kind of running if you want to launch an e-commerce company today, you can kind of plug into all those things and focus on the core. So a lot of things have kind of changed in terms of how you build. Now, one thing that happens when you have this big platform shift that you're seeing now with AI and new technologies being developed, and in the early days, I think it creates a lot of opportunities for younger founders. Because, if you look at the early days of mobile, if you look at the early days of internet, if you look at the early days of cloud, all those big platform shifts, actually a lot of the most successful companies in the world have been built by very young founders, like college dropouts and these types of things, because there's a whole new set of opportunities out there that people haven't seen before, that you don't necessarily need 10, 15 years of industry experience to solve. You just need a spike drive and grit and an insane work culture and ability to build a great product to execute on them. So I think what is very exciting about the times we're in right now, doesn't say that very experienced founders will not also succeed. I think there's great opportunities there as well. But whenever you see these big platform shifts, it tends to be an amazing time. And also now, given that you need less resources to build something, an amazing time for really young, hungry founders to get out there and build incredible companies.
Do you think, as it gets easier to build software, with, for instance, Lovables that you've backed, do you think that distribution becomes increasingly important, and communication and being able to sort of cut through the noise? And I've mentioned this on a few other podcasts. I compared a little bit to being contacted about someone wanting to outsource our IT or something, right? And you get all this in your inbox. You're like, oh, please stop with this. As software gets easier to build, I wonder if that you will get bombarded with more of those. And so to be able to cut through and actually get the attention of the buyer in the right way and get in that room will be increasingly important. Question mark?
I think so. I think distribution's always probably been a little bit underestimated, right? But if you look at the early days of Meta, or the early days of Microsoft, or like a bunch of the very best companies out there, they were just masters of thinking through their distribution network. Obviously, with Facebook, it was creating these hyper local networks, and then scaling through them. And then with Microsoft, they just put together an exceptional B2B and B2C sales team, right? And so these things, I think, have always been a little bit underestimated. In the end, you need a great product, right? Like if you have an amazing distribution and not a great product, it won't work. But like if you have a great product and you don't have great distribution, you can still not end up winning. So I think distribution has always been important. But as you say, I agree with you, even more important in an environment where building the core product is getting easier, right? So there's a lot of great companies there where actually at least getting to kind of version 1, version 2, version 3 is not that difficult. So then once you start something incredible that gets a lot of traction, you will immediately get a ton of competitors. And then obviously you will then need to continue to build a better product. But the only way you will have the resources to do so is if you also have great distribution, right? So distribution is getting more and more important. And obviously distribution channels keep changing, right? One of the great learnings we had in Zalora was if you're really early on new distribution channels, it's very beneficial, right? So, when we started, I guess like 80% of our spend was at Google, then Meta or Facebook became a bigger and bigger part. And then they get more expensive, right? Because then all the big companies start using those channels. And then you have to compete for the keywords and all that. And it gets more expensive. And then we looked, the next one we had a lot of success with was chat apps, right? So distribution through chat apps. We acquired there's a chat app in, for example, Thailand called Line, where we acquired 1 million customers by paying an artist $50,000 to create some stickers they could download for free. And you've seen lately, now TikTok is maturing, right? But if you go 4 or 5 years back in time, you could get an insane amount of customers very cheaply through TikTok if you compare that to Meta. So one always need to look at these new interesting distribution channels, new ways to do B2B sales, new ways to create free marketing, virality, and so on. And that keeps changing. And I think some of the founders today that have been incredibly successful, like Antler, for example, or Global, are just incredibly great at utilizing those new distribution channels to the full. And yeah, I think it's more important now than it was 2-3 years ago, and it'll probably continue to become more and more important.
Can I just ask about Lovable? Big fan, by the way. And he has become like a rock star. It's quite interesting to see how these founders become famous in that way. What distribution channels do you see them using that they use so well?
One of the things I've seen they do very successfully is getting engaged into communities, right? And communities of people who use the platform to build great things, right? So, for example, they organize a bunch of hackathons all over the world. We've been organizing a bunch of them together with them in our offices. They get into communities of founders, communities of creators. And I think that strategy is really, really good. And it's a bit similar to kind of what Mark Zuckerberg did in Meta in the early days. If you can get to high quality small communities, and then everyone in that community start building it, and the word of mouth becomes incredible. And then that network, you get network effects, right? So everyone who uses it will talk to 500 people who are using it. And I think they've done that insanely well in kind of high impact communities that are building great things on their platform. And that creates a lot of resilience in the user base, right? It's a bit different than just going on Meta and buying 1,000 customers for $50 each, right? Because they'll come in, try it, use it for a little bit, and then they might churn, right? But if it's a community based, leading to great product outcomes, then it's resilient, and you get those network effects that you don't get in the same way with paid marketing. So, without being an expert and knowing the inside information, that's at least what I've seen through my interactions with Anton and the team and how we worked with them.
Sorry, Magnus, it was not to put you on the spot, but I think that whole topic of distribution is so interesting because it is changing so fast. I also heard someone talking about ChatGPT and how all the integrations and all the things that they do, how would that play into sort of a new possible distribution model? And it's I am no expert in this at all, but I found it very, very interesting because as these platforms mature, what will be the next one? Because you mentioned the global focus and sort of you're Norwegian and I focus on the Scandi markets here. So I want to ask you a little bit about especially Denmark versus Norway versus Sweden, all of the three. Because you said you started out in Sweden, that was after Singapore. You have you're building companies in all these three locations. What do you think is easier and what is harder in those three? Like, what are some of the differences for good and for bad in those three locations that you see?
Yeah, I think that I think some of this is by chance, right? But like, I think where you had early pioneers, you very quickly inspire a next generation to build great companies, right? So, and obviously their Stockholm quite early went on to have some really exceptional global outcomes, right? And they kind of had, Sweden has kind of had that for years, right? With the old companies like, IKEA, Saab, Volvo, H&M, and so on, right? So historically, they've kind of shown that, hey, we can build this really exceptional kind of global companies out of there. And then you had tech founders doing the same thing with Skype and Spotify and a bunch of others, right? So, and then whenever you have that happening in the ecosystem, like the people who've been working on those companies will go out and build the next generation great businesses, and then the flywheel is starting, right? And people invest into each other, mentor each other, and so I think that is really, really kind of helped kind of Stockholm. I think Stockholm now has like the highest unicorn per capita in the world or something like this. So when that's said, you do now see the same thing happening in Oslo, Copenhagen, and Helsinki, right? In Helsinki, I think Nokia was an incredible place where a lot of talent have gone on to build really great businesses. In Denmark, obviously, you have tremendous global leaders in shipping, in food and manufacturing, in healthcare. People are coming out of there building really, really great companies. In Norway, obviously, we had this whole kind of oil boom, and fishing has been going really well, natural resources and so on. So I think it took a little bit more time for a lot of those people to kind of come out there and build groundbreaking businesses, but it's happening right now. And if you look at the region at the whole, like, it's quite interesting how there are some commonalities in terms of strengths, right? Like, I think, for example, all of the Nordics is very good at like energy transition. There's also really interesting things happening in like cybersecurity. There's really interesting things happening in healthcare and so on. But there are these kind of specific areas where there are very specific strengths in amongst those different countries.
So if you started a company before that was very successful, you see so many new companies being founded, and you invest in hopefully the best of them. If you were to start a new company right now, not a new investment company, but new, let's say, product company, could also be a service company, what would you build? Like, what are the biggest opportunities that you see out there right now?
The two areas I'm most excited about, like personally, where I also see a tremendous amount of opportunities. One is healthcare, because the global healthcare cost is going through the roof, but the marginal impact of each additional dollar hasn't been that high lately. And like, 92% of all global healthcare spend is used for treatment, and 80% of that could have been saved through early detection or simple changes in lifestyle, right? So it's this, and then you have hundreds of millions of people in the world who live without a basic access to healthcare. Like I did this after Harvard. I spent a little bit of time in Africa, in Zambia. We did this small development project there, and literally we were treating people who would have died from simple infections or diarrhea, and you can literally treat this stuff for like a few dollars, right? It's just crazy, like human lives being lost because, like, a Starbucks, you could have sent us, the money for a Starbucks coffee, and you could have saved 3 people's lives. Like, this is happening every day today, right? It's just crazy. So there's an opportunity in the developed world in terms of efficiency of healthcare spend. There's an opportunity in the developing markets to give access to healthcare to hundreds of millions of people. There's also an opportunity, obviously, of AI, biotech, genome technology to solve problems we haven't been able to solve yet, right? You just saw now, the first HIV vaccine is coming out, and mRNA vaccines during COVID. And this is just an amazing area, but it's also very tough and very hard. And you have some obviously leading companies in the Nordics working on a lot of these problems. So that would be kind of area number 1. Area 2 for me is probably the whole energy transition. I think we live in a world today where AI will become more and more important. It's the biggest technological change we've seen in the world probably since mankind started harvesting fire, and that will require energy. At the same time, some people are denying climate change, but it's clearly happening, right? The world is getting warmer, the weather is changing. We only have one world. So we need to produce a tremendous amount of new energy over the next decade to make the world a better place and solve important problems, to create productivity increase. And we need to preferably do that in a way that makes the world cleaner and not more dirty. And we already have a lot of great technologies out there that just requires execution, regulatory changes, and so on, right? And on top of that, there's a lot of new technologies being developed that will increase efficiency. Also, I think there's a lot of interesting things happening in modular nuclear in the Nordics. There's a lot of interesting work in nanofusion. So this area I find very exciting, and you can do a lot of good for the world and at the same time build a really great business. The third one, which I didn't kind of mention up front, but I think it's somewhat important as well, is what's happening in the defense tech space, right? I think that it's high up on the agenda now in the Nordics, all over Europe, obviously, with what's going on in Ukraine. I think all over the world, the democracies need the best defense technology. Otherwise, we won't live in democracies anymore. And I think it's time for some of the world's best founders to innovate within that space, and it's also time for governments to think very differently around how procurement is done, what equipment is being used, and how you support and work with the startup ecosystem. Because it's hopefully not, but you can't gamble on it not being an existential threat. So I think that's an interesting area to look at.
Yeah. Okay. So health, energy transition, and defense tech. Hot and very, very interesting topics. And thank you so much for taking the time to speak with me. It was really, really exciting to hear all your learnings, experiences, and viewpoints about this.
Thank you, Espen. Big fan of what you're doing, and thank you for having me on. I really appreciate it. Great conversation. Thank you.